You're watching Brazos Valley This Morning on KBTX News 3.
Governor Abbott is joining us now from Austin. And Governor, I want to start with something that happened yesterday. You met with George Floyd's family in Houston and suggested that you'll push for the George Floyd Act to prevent future police brutality from happening here in Texas. First, I would like to ask if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing some of what that conversation was like with his family.
Sure. Listen, I wanted to go to the church yesterday to pay my respects to George Floyd and then go to the home of George Floyd's family and get to visit with their members so I could pay my respects to them, but also to have a good, robust conversation with them about exactly what they are feeling and the way that Texas can respond to the challenge that they and so many other people are dealing with. And one of the things that we focused on was the importance of making sure that the type of crime, the type of way that George Floyd was killed with that use of force, that strategies like that would not be used again in the future. And I think that's a reasonable start of where we are. I have had the opportunity to visit with lawmakers across the entire state of Texas to make sure that we are beginning to craft a product that will be in a form that has a good chance of being passed by the legislature this coming session.
What specifically in your mind do you think we need to be doing to honor the memory of George Floyd?
You know, the best thing we can do to honor the memory of George Floyd is to respond to the challenge that we're dealing with right now. And this is exactly what I talked to his family about. I said, listen, I know that what you are going through is an enormous, incalculable challenge. But the important thing for all of us is for us not to allow Texas or America to be defined by this challenge the way that it is now, but instead to be defined by the way we respond to this challenge. And we have an opportunity to seize this moment to pass reforms, to pass legislation, to ensure that no one is killed like this in the future, as well as to take other actions to make sure that we are able to bridge the racial divide that we have in this country.
Now, the process of creating legislation, you've said in the past, will be spearheaded by family members, victims, other people who have suffered because of racism. Do you plan to hold roundtable discussions the way you have for major crises in the past?
You know, what we look forward to is really accelerating that process and make sure that we begin to really focus on honing in on pieces of legislation, understanding this, and that is this is a subject area where the state of Texas has already been robustly involved in working on actually passing legislation. So we're not starting here from a blank slate, but instead we're starting already in motion to be able to address things like this. We start from a position where I think everybody can come to agree upon the notion that the use of force that we saw that took place in Minneapolis against George Floyd is not the type of strategy that law enforcement should use. And so we just need to make sure that, for one, we come up with appropriate use of force strategies. I'll tell you another one that I've heard that I think most people could agree with, and that is our law enforcement officers need better training, both before they ever go onto the streets, but also on an annual basis. And there are some other strategies that I've heard from some other people that we need to make sure that these issues are discussed among the full complement of Texas House and Texas Senate members so that we can have the type of legislation that I know will reach my desk so that I can sign it into law.
One of those efforts and reforms for police departments across the country that is being called for is the idea of defunding or removing some of that funding for police departments. In many cases, officers are asked to do a lot of things beyond just enforcing the law, aiding in mental health issues, trying to solve those types of situations. Do you think that there needs to be some work in shifting some of those responsibilities away from local police officers?
Listen, first, broadly speaking, defunding police is always the wrong move. We need to count on our police officers to maintain peace in our streets. One reason why we were able to even have these protests that took place across Texas and across America is because we did have effective law enforcement officers who put their lives on the line themselves to make sure that there was peace in the streets. And so, candidly, we don't pay our law enforcement officers enough for the type of job that they do. We need to make sure they do follow appropriate standards, but the last thing that we should do is to defund the police. Police do play multiple different roles today that they haven't played in the past, but one thing that is important for them to do, which is one reason why you've seen a change in the strategy, is they really are peace officers. And so one strategy they employ is to work closely with the community to show they're not just there to make arrests, they're there to ensure peace in the community, and that is a very important role for them to continue to be able to play.
Montgomery County is not too far from us here in BRYAN and College Station. Governor, there have been some calls from protesters around the state of Texas and across the country to reopen the Sandra Bland case. I'm interested to get your take on that call.
Well, reopening the case would be a legal issue for, I guess, the district attorney or whoever would be in charge of that. That is a legal issue that is beyond my level of information right now. I don't know the extent to which it was prosecuted, to which it was handled, what the final legal outcome was. I'd have to look into all of that. Putting my lawyer hat back on, I would need to break out the books and look into it to give you a more informed answer.
While race and diversity have been at the forefront the last couple of weeks, Texas is also battling a pandemic. New infections across the state are up about 71% over the last 2 weeks, much of that due to hotspots like prisons and meatpacking plants. What is the state doing to address those issues right now?
A couple of things that are important. One is that since we opened up, the number of people testing positive has increased. However, the number of tests have increased even more than the number of people testing positive. And so people just need to keep in context these numbers that they see. Secondly, one thing that we are doing and will remain prepared to do, and that is to send these surge response teams into areas in which there is an elevated positivity rate to make sure that we are able to contain the spread in those particular regions. The hot spots are these, and that would be jails in particular where we get the highest positivity rate, and then also meatpacking facilities as well as nursing homes. And we've been testing these across the state of Texas very meaningfully, identifying those who test positive and taking strategies to make sure that over a 1 or 2 week time period thereafter, we see a decrease in those testing positive and a normalization of COVID-19 in that particular county.
We're hearing a lot from local businesses that are telling us the capacity restrictions are still making it a little difficult to make ends meet. What is the state doing to continue to help small businesses? And in your opinion, do you think the federal government needs to do more?
Well, what we really need to do is we need to make sure that we continue to open up businesses. The goal is to get people off of the unemployment lines and get them to return to the job. Remembering this, it was just a few months ago that Texas was ranked #1 in the United States for the most new jobs created. Texas was ranked #1 for the fastest growing gross domestic product. Our goal is to return to that standard where people are not dependent upon government benefits, but they're receiving a paycheck where they're able to pay their rent, put food on the table, and advance their own lives. And our goal is to achieve that. And there are several strategies that we must take to make sure that we do achieve that goal. One is an apprehension by so many customers is actually going into, it could be a store, a restaurant, whatever the case may be, and we need to decrease that apprehension by all businesses as well as the entire public doing everything we can to continue to slow the spread. We need to make sure that customers feel that when they go into a business, it is a safe environment for them to go into. Once we are able to establish that safety net, then you'll see more customers going into these businesses, and that will get the engines of our economy going again.
You just mentioned there a minute ago about Texas being at the top of several lists when it comes to things. That was pre-COVID. Is there a time frame in your mind when you think the state might be able to start moving back in that direction on the things that you said we excelled at before?
You know, in a way, we've already hit that marker as an easy example, and that is for the month of May. The #1 busiest airport in the entire world, not in America, but in the entire world, was the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And so you are seeing some ways in which Texas is leading the economic recovery. Our goal is to make sure we are able to continue that trend. The only way, however, that we will be able to continue that trend is by everybody making sure we continue these safe practices, because until we have medications that treat COVID-19, until we have immunizations that will end COVID-19, we must maintain these safe distancing practices. Only to the extent that we do that will we be able to continue to open up Texas for doing business.
As we see some of these new infections continue to rise, do you expect that it will stall some of the reopening process?
It's impossible to tell right now because there are too many uncertainties. One of them, we are still seeing some spillover from Memorial Day, but another uncertainty that we are just now beginning to see information from is what is going to be the consequence of all these very large, sizable gatherings that have taken place because of the protests. In some areas like Houston and Dallas and Austin, you'll have 5,000 or 10,000 people or more. And then these were taking place in communities across the entire state of Texas. And this is the type of setting with so many people so close together that it would be an environment where COVID-19 could transmit far more easily. And so it'll take another 10 days to 2 weeks for us to see the signs of whether or not this does actually lead to a spike in COVID-19 cases or not.
Last question I have for you, Governor. We are dealing, obviously, with the conversation around race in our state. We are dealing with a pandemic and its implications in our state, and hurricane season is happening for those of us along the Gulf Coast. Do you worry about all of those things happening at the same time taxing the state too much?
So I work with the professionals who lead the state of Texas, whether it be Chief Nimkid of the Texas Division of Emergency Management and his team, whether it be General Tracy Norris of the National Guard, whether it be the leaders of the State Department of State Health Services or Health and Human Services Commission, et cetera. And what I see, we have teams of people across the state of Texas who are engaged and they are ready for this process of dealing with all of these challenges. Texans are up to the challenge in the past. Texans are up to the challenge in the present. And if a tropical storm comes in or whatever the case may be, Texans will be there on the ready to make sure we respond and keep our community safe.
Governor Greg Abbott in Austin, we appreciate your time, sir.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you all.